Thank you for watching Rider Nation Station's presentation of Third and Long, brought to you by these following fine sponsors: Buffalo Wild Wings, Miller's Funeral Home, Eagles Lodge 767, Rabel's Auto Service, Plus One Professionals, All Glaze Equipment Rental, Midway Trailers, American Legion Post 323, Albert Sporting Goods, Family Audiology, Speckman Automotive, Kogi Plumbing and Heating, Spees Chiropractic, Varsity Lanes, Minster Bank, VFW Post 9289, and Gwinneri Pizzeria.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Third and Long on Rider Nation Station. I'm joined by my co-host, Zach Farrell. I'm Joe Hurlburn. Of course, we appreciate our coaches joining us each and every week, Roger Duncan, Greg Freewalt, and Denny Long. And first of all, I want to address this one to Coach Duncan. You know, when you look at the Western Buckeye League, the St. Mary's Rough Riders have won or tied, I think, 25 championships in football. Van Wert is second, I think, with 19 championships. Coach, were you a part of any of those championships at Van Wert?
Yeah, I was a part in 58. I was a sophomore, and we won the league and extended quite a long winning streak. And then the next year we boo-booed both. We lost the league and we lost the winning streak. So yeah, I was a part way back when, and at that time football was quite important at Van Wert, and just had a great coaching staff, great bunch of people, and things. It was very similar to what later on I experienced here.
So I guess that leads us into our my other question is that, you know, the system that Van Wert has intact, that when you played, is that similar to the system that they're doing now, or has things changed over the years?
Well, I think we talked a couple weeks ago about Jerry Butai. I think when Jerry Butai was there, they started to get an organized system. I think the young man that's there right now, I think he has an organized system. Back when I was in school, Gil Smith was the head coach, and then when he retired, Odie Kuhn. But there were three coaches at that time on the varsity level: Coach Kuhn, Coach Smith, and Nick Kluka, and they had been together for years, and they ran the single wing, and they just had it down to perfection. Every year it was like day one you did this, day two you did that, and so forth. So yeah, they had a great system, and I think this guy has a more wide open system, but I think he really has it organized, and he's had some people to fill in the spots, and so I think they're going in the right direction.
And this works out as well because Coach Freewalt coached the defense, Coach Long the offense. I'll ask Coach Long first. Coach, what was in preparation for Van Wert's defense? What was the things that you kind of instilled in your offense as you prepared for Van Wert defensively over the years?
Well, they didn't make a great many mistakes, and we kind of counted on that. They're going to play, and we can't make mistakes. Maybe that's the situation here this week. Because they probably aren't going to make a whole lot of mistakes. They're well coached, and if you do, you're going to lose. So that was that, especially if you play them late in the season like this year. You shouldn't be jumping off sides, and you shouldn't be holding, and you shouldn't be having interference calls on a stupid thing. So that's probably it.
When you're talking about WBL championships, I came back to the coaching staff in 1971. And I remember looking at the board and seeing Van Wert way ahead of us. At that time, we had 6 WBL championships since 1937, and they had 15. And I was saying, boy, if we could only get ahead of them. And as I watched as the years went by, we were climbing. And when I left, we had 19 WBL championships, and they still had 15. So, you know, that was a real goal of mine, and that worked out great.
And we know that through the years, especially recently, they've put some very good teams together. They've had a state championship just 3 years ago. Any certain teams from your years stick out? I know they had another state championship in the 90s, but what other years stick out for you guys?
I'm going to go way back. This story is going to be told sooner or later anyhow. We might as well get it off the thing. When I first came to St. Mary's in '62, I interviewed with a superintendent, H.H. Cook, and we were talking football, of course, and he said, tough league, he said. The last 50 in the 50s, Van Wert dominated, won 7 times. And he said, but it's turning around. And he said, in fact, we had them beat 3 years ago, but they cheated. And so we only ended up with a tie. And then I got a haircut at Baxter's Barbershop, and same thing. Yeah, they cheated. They wouldn't get off the pile. And then talking to all the guys around town, Finn and Hitchin and Goodwins and all them, and the stories got worse and worse as they told them. But apparently what happened was the game was tied, and St. Mary's was driving all the way down to the field. Time was running out, but there was still plenty of time. Maybe 45 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, depends on who you hear. At any rate, at one point, St. Mary's ran the ball, got it down the 1-yard line with plenty of time left, except every kid on the Van Wert team jumped on the pile and wouldn't get off. And the referees in those days didn't call timeout right away. And they laid there for like 2 minutes until they peeled them off. And when they got them peeled off, at the bottom of the pile was Roger Duncan. He was the scoundrel that led the charge, jumped on the ball carrier, and laid there until the clock ran out.
Some of the great years that I remember.
Hold up. I think we need Roger to respond to that allegation first.
I wasn't sure I was going to get a chance to defend myself. Basically, what Denny said was somewhat true. There was a big pile. What I remember, and of course it's been since the dark ages, that the ball was here and the ball kept going back and forth. And I don't know if it was fumbled or the ball carrier was trying to extend it toward the goal line, because Denny said, as he said, they were very close. And so I remember the ball was there and I would pull it my way, and then somebody would pull it over here and then it'd go back that way. And I looked over my shoulder and like, who in the hallelujah is that? Well, it was a guy named Mike Tanner, who was my linebacker. So there was a good sign on our part that I was a defensive tackle and he was a linebacker, and we were right there where the ball was. And so the ball kept going like this, and like Denny said, it just seemed like the world kept falling on you. And so, yeah, we stayed there and stayed there, and bang, the gun went off. And that was the end of the game. And so the blemish was that St. Mary's was undefeated, and that made them 8-0 and a tie. And yeah, I've caught in hallelujah. I came here, and it was funny coming here because luckily I made best friends with Buzz Howard and Claude Graves and some of the guys that were very competitive here in St. Mary's, and I weathered that storm. But yeah, Cork Martindale just gets furious when you bring that up. Let me take one little second for an extended part of that story. I started dating my wife and asked her to marry her, and one of the ladies that my mother-in-law worked with said, "I can't believe you're allowing your daughter to marry that cheater from Van Wert."
I think Dunk didn't even admit he was from Van Wert the first 3 years he was in St. Mary's. He said something about Middle Point or Ohio City or someplace up there like that, but we found out.
Well, some of the memorable years as we go back, 1978, we were 9-0 going into the last game, which was Van Wert. And Van Wert's been up and down, and they're on a good roll right now. But back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were really on a roll. That's where they won all those WBL championships. So in 1978, we're 9-0 going into the last game. And I remember we were going to the playoffs. We knew that. And the things worked out very well for us because the first 11 times that we touched the ball, we scored 9 times. The game ended up 63-0. And, you know, with the 11 times, the whole second half was almost reserves playing. And one of the big things that stood out, I remember Greg Clark went 97 yards from a play all the way for a touchdown. So that was one of the records. So that was one of the big plays.
In that period of time, seeing as how I actually did come from Van Wert, not Middle Point or whatever, 2 guys on the chain gang, Willie Hernandez and I think it was Gary Mefford. They were the Van Wert players when I was in junior high. And so knowing them or admiring them all this time, they would always say, well, what are you going to do to us now, run that trap? And I said, no, we're going to run that counter. And 3 years in a row, our opening play was the wingback counter, and it went all the way. And that, so whenever I would say, we're running a counter, Willie, and he would just go, oh, like that.
Over the years, Van Wert has had some pretty decent athletes, with the exception of, I can't say, of the cheater that's sitting down there on the end. But any individual, offensively or defensive player, I know they had Joel Penton at one time at Van Wert, later went on to play at Ohio State. He was probably they're probably the most well-known as far as coming out of Van Wert. Any other player that you could recall over the years that came out of Van Wert that kind of give you fits as you prepared for them during the week?
There was a young man that was a tailback that went to OU. Boy, oh boy, I can't remember his name. But he was very strong, and at that time a lot of teams ran the I formation, and he was a tailback, and I remember he was quite good. Boy, I can't remember his name, but he went to OU. When I was growing up, Willie Hernandez was a name that the older people would remember, and Chico Young, Charlie Young, he was a great tailback. And again, of course, in the single wing, it was like you didn't have a quarterback that was under center. He was a guard. Actually, he called the plays, but he was a guard. You had the fullback and tailback. It was like in a shotgun formation today. And so he was the tailback, and he was the guy that did everything. And he was exceptionally good. A lot of those guys, it seemed like, went to Muskingum. And oh gosh, what's the college? Albion, maybe Albion. But a lot of those guys went to smaller schools. They weren't real big, but they were tremendous ball carriers.
You know, you've seen last week's game, Wapak and the Van Wert game. Of course, Van Wert punted the football with 12 seconds remaining on Wapak's 43-yard line. And again, it could very well come down to that on Friday night. And special teams is a big part of a program.
Yes, our loss to Wapak was special teams. They always started at 20. We started at the 20-yard line. They started at midfield. They run the ball back, and then they kick it into the end zone or kick it into the corner. That in a close game, that's going to make the big difference.
I'll jump to the other side. That this was the year 81-82, and we're playing Van Wert. We were very good on defense at the time, probably competitive with the 90 team defenses. And one of the big names, maybe one of the best players that we ever had there, was Don Johnson. Played at Louisville then, and along with him across the line was John Philippi, Rockwood, and McDermott. And Don Johnson was so fierce that when he came off the ball, he would be driving the center or the offensive guard in the backfield. And that we set a lot of records because he had run the quarterback out of there, and then our 2 defensive tackles would sack the quarterback. But when we're playing Van Wert, Don's family had come up from Georgia to watch him. He put on a show that night. And their coach, after the game was telling us that he would call a play and the quarterback would automatically call because Johnson was driving the center and the guard back in his face. He couldn't get the play off. He couldn't pass. He couldn't run. And I think that night, Van Wert had a total of 33 yards. So that was a great game.
The game this weekend is in Van Wert, Wert Stadium, and historical stadium, and they've already announced that they have plans to renovate that stadium. Just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that stadium itself and any memories you have of. I know they've got the wall in the end zone, and they used to have the school on the south side of the field there, similar to how Skip had the stadium. Any specific memories about that stadium?
I have a story on cheating in Van Wert again. We got up there one year, and it was fall, and it hadn't rained for months, and the field was just sopping wet. And there was a big area on about the 35-yard line that you splash when you walk through it. It's slosh like that. And so Skip was furious. He knew what had happened. They watered the field because they thought that would slow us down. And so we challenged the coach on that, and he says, no, he said the janitors left the sprinklers on. So what happened? And we didn't catch it in time like that. So we played the game, and there were some things made. If you're going to be in the swamp, they'd put the ball on the other hash mark, the referees would, so that you didn't have to go through the swamp as much. Actually, I think it didn't make a difference at all. We were a better team, and we can beat them. In fact, you know what? I think weather conditions, field conditions, so on, the better the team is, the better their chances are, because good teams can adjust. Bad teams have trouble adjusting. So that didn't work, but that coach had to apologize and make excuses for the rest of his career at Van Wert. I don't remember who it is, maybe you do, but he wasn't there too long anyhow.
Yeah, I don't remember who the coach was, but I remember the kids came, you know, we get there to walk around and stretch our legs after the bus, and the kids came over and said, there's a tank trap in the middle of the field. And it was that swamp that Coach Long was talking about. You ask about memorable players at Van Wert, and I like Penton, of course, but we were spoiled here. I mean, we were on a roll with such people, you know, Jeff Sisko, Jimmy Cook, Alston, Mike Hirschfeld. I mean, we just were spoiled. And so Coach Long and I one year thought we were outstanding line coaches, and we were averaging 40 points a game. First three games we had 40-some points, and then there was this kid named Jimmy Cook, who was our running back, got hurt. And all of a sudden our offensive output was about 8 points a game. And Coach Long and I looked at each other and realized that we weren't as good as we thought we were, but Jimmy Cook was really, really good.
We talked about Van Wert and the stadium. Of course, St. Mary's will be up there this Friday night. And of course, it's a WPA project. And keep in mind, their press box goes from the 30 to the 30. But yet Rider Nation Station will be there in the All Glaze rental mobile press box on the visitor's side in a scissor lift to bring you the game. But nonetheless, we'll be there to bring you the game. So again, like Zach said, renovations are coming their way. And of course, most of the teams in the Western Buckeye League are now going to artificial surface. And I think Van Wert is one that will still have grass, which brings me to a question. You've coached on both grass and artificial surface. Any special preparations for grass versus artificial surface?
Well, I think it might depend on weather conditions. The artificial turf, it's nice to play on. The players seem fast. I know college, we played on a couple times. You seem fast on it. Sometimes when you get hit and go down, it seems a little harder. But, artificial turf would be much the choice. And back in the early days when we first got to play on it in the playoff games, a lot had to do with shoes for footing and stuff, and we really didn't know that much when we first played on it. But I think the AstroTurf is a real thing. And we remember the old days when we used to have to wash the uniforms after the games. And if you played in a wet, muddy, it was a mess washing all those uniforms there, trying to get them there. We'd be there half the night trying to get stuff done. So AstroTurf is the best.
Like Greg was saying, the one thing you noticed about AstroTurf, I remember the first time we got in the playoffs and went to Berea, the kids were just shocked. They were so excited to play on turf, but they were so shocked as to how hard it was. And after the game, there are an awful lot of kids sitting around and on the floor, rubbing their legs and rubbing their backsides and their backs and shoulders, because it was like, it's just like hitting a rock. They've improved it so much. You see those little black rubber things fly out that have softened it. The grass is actually a little longer, and like Coach Freewalt said, it is fast. The only bad thing about it's really, really hot, and you get those really hot days, and they're out there playing, and it's 95 degrees, and they put the thermometer on the field, and it'll be 110. But all in all, it's more durable. Everybody can use it, and that's the advantage.
Well, I think that we're going to sort of maybe get your closing thoughts on Van Wert, maybe talk about the Van Wert and St. Mary's game this year, what your thoughts are on St. Mary's and how they played last week and against OG, and then we'll just sort of wrap it up with those ending thoughts. Just one more thought about Van Wert. I think about all their success through the years, but I don't think of necessarily one or even two coaches that stick out as some perennial type of guy, or certainly nothing like Skip Bachman. So maybe talk about the history with their coaches and just sort of final thoughts on the Van Wert St. Mary's series over the years.
First of all, I'll talk about historic coaches. Gil Smith, when I was in school, was the Skip Bachman of Van Wert. He's a Hall of Fame coach. I think I forget how many WBL championships we won, but we won 47 in a row at one time, regular season games. As far as this week's game, I think our objective is to kind of redo last year, where we basically lined up in about one or two formations and just took the ball right at them. It kept their offense off the field. I think it wore them out a little bit, and I think to the way I see the game, it would probably go that way to our advantage.
And I agree with Roger there. I think the thing that we did last year, that we decided we're going to drive the ball and keep the ball, and that's what beat them. If we would have turned that ball over to them to throw that thing, they could put it in the end zone. So I think ball control is the name of the game for us here this Friday night if we want to win.
Yes, we have to do what we do, and what we do is run the ball and run the ball. I know you pass a lot, but people keep saying we ought to throw more and all that. But if you don't throw, then you're not really very good at it. And teams that don't run the ball aren't very good at running the ball either. And when you get mid-season and you've only thrown a couple dozen passes, not only the quarterback, but the linemen aren't good at pass protection. They don't have much experience in pass protection. And the receivers, the same thing. So, yeah, we have to do what we do. And I think we'll probably end up throwing a couple touchdowns, too.
One more thing. I hope there's no Van Wert kid that gets real tired and lays on the ball carrier.
Absolutely. Well, again, just to reiterate some facts, the Van Wert has the number one team in the Western Buckeye League as passing offense, total offense, and scoring offense. But yet the Rough Riders, sometimes they say the best defense is a good offense. And when the Rough Riders, who have the number one rushing team in the Western Buckeye League, can stay on the field and, like the coaches talked about, just keep it pounding it out, first down, you keep their offense off the field, that can be vital as well. So we'll just have to wait and see. So once again, we want to thank the coaches for joining us, and again, they'll be joining us each and every week on Third and Long. Zach, any final thoughts?
Just want to thank everybody for being here, and hopefully we see a nice victory from St. Mary's over Van Wert this week.
Of course, that's going to wrap it up here for this edition of Third and Long. For our three coaches, my co-host Zach Farrell, I'm Joe Hurlbert. Until next time, so long, everyone.
Thank you for watching Rider Nation Station's presentation of Third and Long, brought to you by these following fine sponsors: Buffalo Wild Wings, Miller's Funeral Home, Eagles Lodge 767, Rabel's Auto Service, Plus One Professionals, All Glaze Equipment Rental, Midway Trailers, American Legion Post 323, Albert Sporting Goods, Family Audiology, Speckman Automotive, Kogi Plumbing and Heating, Spees Chiropractic, Varsity Lanes, Minster Bank, VFW Post 9289, and Guarneri Pizzeria. Thanks for watching another episode of Rider Nation Station. Help us help you by subscribing on YouTube or following us on Facebook.